The morning of December 7th, 1941 dawned with deceptive tranquility over Pearl Harbor. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida adjusted his flight goggles as his Nakajima B-5N Kate bomber lifted from the carrier Akagi's deck, leading the largest naval aviation assault in history. Behind him, 183 aircraft rose like a metallic storm cloud against the amber Pacific sunrise, their engines harmonizing in a deadly symphony that would echo through generations. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stood rigid on Akagi's bridge, his weathered hands gripping the rail as he watched his meticulously planned operation unfold. The strike force had traveled over 3,000 miles in complete radio silence, navigating treacherous northern Pacific waters to achieve the impossible: total surprise against America's Pacific Fleet. Intelligence reports confirmed 8 battleships lay anchored like sleeping giants in Battleship Row, their crews enjoying a peaceful Sunday morning routine. Meanwhile, on Ford Island, Seaman First Class James Rasmussen whistled softly while polishing brass fittings aboard the battleship Arizona. The 20-year-old farm boy from Iowa had joined the Navy seeking adventure, never imagining he would witness history's pivot point. Around him, the harbor bustled with routine weekend activity: sailors writing letters home, officers attending morning briefings, and maintenance crews performing endless upkeep on America's mightiest warships. Lieutenant Commander Logan Ramsey sat in the Ford Island Command Center, reviewing weather reports and flight schedules. The morning seemed perfect for training exercises, with clear skies and calm seas stretching to the horizon. Radio chatter remained routine, filled with standard operational communications and weekend liberty requests. Nothing suggested that, across the Pacific, Emperor Hirohito's war machine had already set in motion events that would drag America into global conflict. At 6:15 that morning, the destroyer Ward had spotted and sunk a Japanese midget submarine attempting to penetrate Pearl Harbor's defenses. However, the significance of this encounter remained unclear to base commanders, who dismissed it as a possible training exercise mishap. The warning signs were there, scattered like puzzle pieces across various command posts, but no single person possessed enough information to recognize the approaching catastrophe. Commander Fuchida checked his watch and surveyed the peaceful scene below. Hickam Field appeared quiet, with rows of aircraft parked wingtip to wingtip for protection against sabotage, an ironic precaution that would prove devastatingly counterproductive. Wheeler Field showed similar vulnerability, while the great battleships sat motionless in their berths, their crews completely unaware that death approached from above. According to the comprehensive analysis in Gordon Pranga's "At Dawn We Slept," the Japanese achieved complete tactical surprise despite numerous warning indicators that American intelligence failed to piece together. The attack force split into designated groups as they approached Oahu's northern coast. Dive bombers peeled away toward airfields, while torpedo planes descended toward the harbor's entrance. Fighter aircraft took high cover positions, preparing to engage any American defenders who might rise to challenge them. Each pilot knew his target. Each crew understood their role in this carefully choreographed dance of destruction. As Fuchida's formation crested the Koolau Mountains, Pearl Harbor spread before them like a detailed tactical map. The site exceeded their most optimistic intelligence estimates: 7 battleships moored along Ford Island's eastern shore, with Pennsylvania resting in dry dock nearby. Cruisers, destroyers, and auxiliaries filled the harbor like a maritime treasure trove waiting to be claimed. Commander Fuchida raised his flare gun, paused for one final moment to appreciate the magnitude of what was about to unfold, then fired, the signal that would transform the Pacific into a theater of total war. At 7:55 on that fateful Sunday morning, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida's voice crackled through radio frequencies as he transmitted the coded message that would resonate through history. Tora! 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 The signal confirmed complete surprise had been achieved, and within seconds, the peaceful morning exploded into chaos as the first bombs began falling on Ford Island. Seaman James Rasmussen was securing a line on Arizona's forecastle when the distinctive whine of diving aircraft pierced the morning calm. He looked up to see unfamiliar planes bearing the rising sun insignia, their wings glinting in the early sunlight. Before he could fully process what he was witnessing, machine gun bullets began stitching patterns across the harbor's surface, sending geysers of water skyward. Lieutenant Commander Logan Ramsey burst from the Ford Island command post as explosions thundered across Hickam Field. Through his binoculars, he watched in horror as Japanese dive bombers systematically destroyed rows of American aircraft, their precision attacks eliminating any possibility of aerial defense. "This is no drill," he shouted into his radio, but his warning came too late to prevent the unfolding catastrophe. The first torpedo struck Oklahoma at approximately 800 hours, the massive explosion rolling the great battleship to port as seawater flooded her compartments. Sailors scrambled across tilting decks while their ship slowly capsized, trapping hundreds of men in rapidly flooding spaces below. Captain Howard Bode fought desperately to coordinate damage control efforts, but Oklahoma's fate was sealed within minutes of the attack's beginning. West Virginia absorbed multiple torpedo hits in rapid succession, her captain, Mervyn Bennion, mortally wounded by shrapnel from nearby explosions. The ship settled into the harbor mud, her superstructure ablaze while survivors struggled to escape through oil-slicked water. Petty Officer Doris Miller, an African-American mess attendant, dragged wounded sailors to safety before manning an anti-aircraft gun, despite having no formal gunnery training. California suffered 2 torpedo strikes that flooded her forward compartments, but swift damage control prevented immediate capsizing. Her crew fought valiantly to keep their ship afloat while Japanese aircraft continued their relentless assault. Maryland, protected by Oklahoma's bulk, escaped torpedo damage, but endured repeated bombing attacks that tested her crew's resolve. Nevada, the only battleship to get underway during the attack, became a symbol of American defiance as she steamed toward the harbor entrance. Japanese pilots, recognizing the danger of allowing any capital ship to escape, concentrated their attacks on the moving battleship. Bombs rained down on her decks as she fought her way through the channel, her flag flying proudly despite the inferno consuming her superstructure. The New York Times would later report that Nevada's heroic attempt to reach open water represented the finest traditions of the United States Navy under impossible circumstances. Pennsylvania, secure in Dry Dock No. 1, became a fortress of resistance as her crew manned every available weapon. The flagship of the Pacific Fleet poured anti-aircraft fire into the sky while bombs exploded around her, her sailors determined to extract a price from their attackers. Destroyers Cassin and Downs, sharing the dry dock, absorbed multiple bomb hits that triggered massive explosions in their magazines. Tennessee, moored inboard of West Virginia, found herself trapped by her sinking companion, but maintained devastating anti-aircraft fire throughout the assault. Her crew displayed exceptional courage, continuing to fight while surrounded by burning oil and exploding ammunition. The battleship's guns spoke defiantly against overwhelming odds, their muzzle flashes adding to the morning's deadly fireworks display. As the first wave of attackers completed their runs, a temporary lull settled over the harbor. Smoke columns rose thousands of feet into the previously pristine sky, while the acrid smell of burning fuel oil mixed with cordite created an atmosphere of apocalyptic destruction. Survivors struggled through debris-filled water, many suffering severe burns from the flaming petroleum that coated the harbor's surface. Commander Fuchida circled overhead, assessing the devastation his force had wrought. The sight exceeded his most optimistic expectations. Multiple battleships sinking or severely damaged, aircraft burning on every airfield, and American defensive capabilities essentially neutralized. Yet he knew the second wave was still approaching, and the morning's work remained far from complete. The Japanese had achieved tactical surprise beyond their wildest dreams, but they had also awakened a sleeping giant whose response would reshape the entire world's destiny. At 8:30 that morning, as Commander Fuchida's first wave departed, Lieutenant Commander Shigeharu Murata led 171 aircraft in the second assault against Pearl Harbor. The Japanese pilots encountered a transformed target, no longer the peaceful anchorage they had studied in reconnaissance photographs, but a smoke-shrouded hell where American defenders had found their fighting spirit. Aboard the capsizing Oklahoma, Seaman Stephen Young found himself trapped in a rapidly flooding compartment with 32 shipmates. Water rose steadily around them as the battleship rolled further to port, her massive hull settling into the harbor mud. Young and his companions began the desperate process of cutting through bulkheads with hand tools, racing against time and rising water in their fight for survival. The second wave concentrated on targets missed during the initial assault, but they faced fierce resistance from American gunners who had overcome their initial shock. Every undamaged weapon in the harbor now trained skyward, creating a deadly curtain of anti-aircraft fire. Petty Officer Calvin Graham, though only 12 years old and serving under false enlistment papers, manned a machine gun aboard West Virginia with the composure of a seasoned veteran. At Hickam Field, Staff Sergeant Joseph Lockard coordinated rescue efforts while Japanese dive bombers continued their systematic destruction of American aircraft. The mobile radar unit that had detected the incoming attack force now lay in twisted wreckage, its warning capabilities silenced forever. Lockard moved between burning hangars, pulling injured airmen from the rubble while dodging strafing runs from Japanese fighters. Arizona's forward magazine detonated at 9:06 with a blast that shattered windows throughout Honolulu. 10 miles away. The explosion lifted the 32,000-ton battleship bodily from the water before she crashed back down, her forward superstructure completely obliterated. Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg and Admiral Isaac Kidd perished instantly, along with over 1,000 officers and men who had no chance to escape the inferno. Historical records from the Naval History and Heritage Command confirm that Arizona's destruction became the enduring symbol of Pearl Harbor's tragedy, with her wreckage serving as an eternal memorial to American sacrifice. Amid the chaos, individual acts of heroism emerged like beacons of hope. Chief Petty Officer John Finn continued manning his machine gun at Kaneohe Bay Naval Air Station despite multiple wounds, his determination inspiring younger sailors to maintain their positions under intense enemy fire. Aviation machinist's mate, First Class John Hendon single-handedly attempted to launch a patrol bomber while Japanese fighters strafed the seaplane base around him. The destroyer Shaw, trapped in a floating dry dock, absorbed multiple bomb hits that triggered a spectacular magazine explosion. The blast created a mushroom cloud visible throughout Oahu, while Shaw's forward section simply vanished in the detonation. Incredibly, her crew managed to save the after portion of their ship, testament to American damage control training and sheer determination. Hospital ships and medical personnel worked frantically to treat hundreds of casualties as wounded sailors continued arriving from throughout the harbor. Nurses at Pearl Harbor Naval Hospital displayed extraordinary courage, maintaining their duties while bombs exploded nearby and shrapnel shattered windows around them. The hospital's blood bank quickly emptied as surgeons performed emergency operations in improvised operating rooms. Japanese dive bombers targeted the massive fuel tank farms that supplied the Pacific Fleet, but remarkably, these critical installations escaped serious damage. Had the attackers succeeded in destroying these facilities, the American war effort in the Pacific would have been delayed by months or even years. The tanks' survival represented one of the few strategic failures in an otherwise devastatingly successful Japanese operation. As the second wave completed its attacks, submarine-launched midget submarines attempted to penetrate the harbor's inner defenses. The destroyer Monaghan rammed and depth-charged one intruder, while another ran aground near Bellows Field. These miniature submarines represented Japan's most secret weapon, but their contribution to the overall assault proved minimal compared to the devastating aerial bombardment. By 10:30 that morning, the last Japanese aircraft departed Hawaiian airspace, leaving behind a scene of unprecedented destruction. 8 battleships had been sunk or severely damaged, along with 3 cruisers, 4 destroyers, and numerous auxiliary vessels. American aircraft losses exceeded 200 planes destroyed or damaged, while personnel casualties approached 4,000 killed and wounded. Yet within the smoke and devastation, the foundation of American resolve had been forged in steel and sacrifice, preparing for a response that would ultimately reach Tokyo itself. As the last Japanese aircraft disappeared beyond Oahu's horizon at 10:45 that morning, a stunned silence settled over Pearl Harbor, broken only by the crackle of burning ships and the desperate cries of trapped sailors. Commander Logan Ramsey stood amid the wreckage of Ford Island, surveying devastation that exceeded America's worst military nightmare. The Pacific Fleet lay in ruins, but within the smoke and debris, the seeds of unprecedented determination were already taking root. Rear Admiral William Furlong, commanding the Pearl Harbor Naval Base, immediately initiated massive rescue operations, despite the continuing threat of additional attacks. Sailors and civilians worked side by side, cutting through twisted steel to reach survivors trapped within capsized hulls. The sound of hammering from within Oklahoma's overturned hull indicated men still lived within her flooded compartments, spurring rescuers to superhuman efforts that would continue for days. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt received word of the attack while meeting with advisor Harry Hopkins at the White House. The president's initial disbelief quickly transformed into grim determination, as reports confirmed the scope of Japanese treachery. Roosevelt immediately began composing what would become known as the Day of Infamy speech, carefully choosing words that would unite a divided nation behind the cause of total victory. Within hours of the attack's conclusion, Pearl Harbor became a massive salvage operation unlike anything previously attempted in naval history. Captain Homer Wallen, the harbor's repair officer, began assessing which ships could be saved and returned to service. His teams worked with desperate urgency, knowing that every vessel raised from the harbor floor would strengthen America's capacity for revenge against the Japanese Empire. The human cost of Japan's surprise attack extended far beyond military casualties. Throughout Honolulu, civilian families waited anxiously for news of loved ones stationed at Pearl Harbor and surrounding military installations. Telephone lines jammed with desperate inquiries, while radio broadcasts struggled to provide accurate information amid the chaos. The attack had transformed thousands of Hawaiian families into Gold Star families within a matter of hours. According to Gordon Pranga's definitive account, "At dawn we slept," the Pearl Harbor attack unified American public opinion in a way that previous events had failed to achieve, transforming isolationist sentiment into overwhelming support for total war. Intelligence analysts worked frantically to determine whether the Pearl Harbor assault represented merely the first phase of a larger Japanese offensive. Reports flooded in from throughout the Pacific indicating simultaneous attacks against American and British positions in the Philippines, Malaya, and Hong Kong. The scope of Japanese aggression revealed a coordinated strategy aimed at eliminating Western power throughout the Pacific Basin. Admiral Husband Kimmel, commander of the Pacific Fleet, faced the devastating reality that most of his battle line lay on the harbor bottom. However, the Japanese had failed to destroy Pearl Harbor's repair facilities, fuel storage, or submarine base, oversights that would prove crucial in America's eventual victory. The aircraft carriers Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga had escaped destruction by being at sea during the attack, preserving the foundation of America's future naval aviation supremacy. Emergency medical teams from throughout Hawaii converged on Pearl Harbor to treat the massive number of casualties. Tripler Army Hospital, designed for peacetime garrison medicine, suddenly became a major trauma center, treating burns, fractures, and wounds that would have challenged metropolitan hospitals. Civilian doctors and nurses volunteered their services, working alongside military medical personnel in improvised treatment facilities. The attack's immediate aftermath revealed both the extent of American unpreparedness and the remarkable resilience of American personnel. Despite being caught completely by surprise, individual acts of heroism and quick thinking had prevented even greater catastrophe. Anti-aircraft gunners had quickly manned their weapons, damage control parties had saved several ships from total loss, and rescue operations had begun within minutes of the attack's conclusion. As darkness fell over Oahu on December 7, 1941, America faced the sobering reality of global war. The age of American innocence had ended in the smoke and flames of Pearl Harbor, but from that destruction emerged a national unity and determination that would prove unstoppable. The Japanese had succeeded in their tactical objectives, but they had also committed a strategic blunder that would ultimately lead to their own destruction. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, reportedly observed that Japan had awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with terrible resolve. Within 24 hours, America would formally enter World War II, beginning a titanic struggle that would reshape global civilization and establish American dominance for generations to come. On the morning of December 8, 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt stood before a joint session of Congress in the House chamber, his voice resonating with controlled fury as he delivered the most consequential speech in American history. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The president's words electrified the nation and sealed Japan's fate. Within Pearl Harbor's smoke-shrouded anchorage, salvage crews worked around the clock to assess the damage and begin the Herculean task of restoration. Captain Homer Wallens. Teams discovered that while the destruction appeared overwhelming, many vessels could potentially be raised and returned to service. Nevada, despite her battle damage, remained operational and would soon sail to the mainland for repairs. The Phoenix fleet was about to be born from Pearl Harbor's ashes. The human drama continued as rescue operations pressed on with desperate intensity. Inside Oklahoma's overturned hull, 32 sailors had been trapped when the battleship capsized. Naval constructor Julio de Castro led cutting operations that raced against rising water and diminishing air supplies. After 36 hours of continuous work, they reached the first survivors, pulling men from what had seemed certain death within their steel tomb. Throughout America, the Pearl Harbor attack triggered an unprecedented wave of patriotic fervor. Recruiting stations reported lines stretching for blocks as young men sought immediate enlistment. Industrial plants converted to wartime production with remarkable speed, while families began rationing programs and victory garden plantings. The nation's transformation from peacetime complacency to total war commitment occurred with breathtaking rapidity. Admiral Chester Nimitz received orders to assume command of the Pacific Fleet, replacing Admiral Husband Kimmel, who had become the scapegoat for the attack's success. Nimitz arrived at Pearl Harbor on Christmas Day, 1941, surveying the destruction with the calm determination that would characterize his leadership throughout the Pacific War. His first priority involved restoring fleet morale and preparing for offensive operations against Japanese positions. The Washington Post's coverage of Pearl Harbor's aftermath emphasized how quickly American industry and society mobilized for global conflict, transforming the nation's entire economic and social structure within weeks of the attack. Intelligence analysis revealed the attack's strategic implications extended far beyond Pearl Harbor itself. Japanese forces had simultaneously struck American positions in the Philippines, British installations in Hong Kong and Malaya, and Dutch facilities in the East Indies. The coordination demonstrated Japan's commitment to total Pacific domination, making American involvement in global warfare inevitable regardless of Pearl Harbor's outcome. The salvage operations at Pearl Harbor became a symbol of American determination and ingenuity. California was successfully refloated and returned to service, as were West Virginia and Tennessee. Even Arizona contributed to the war effort, her superstructure guns being removed and installed on other vessels. The Japanese had sunk America's battle line, but they had also provided the motivation for building an even more powerful fleet. War production accelerated at an unprecedented pace as American industry converted to military manufacturing. The Ford Motor Company began producing B-24 bombers at Willow Run, while General Motors manufactured tanks, aircraft engines, and naval vessels. The arsenal of democracy emerged from the Pearl Harbor attack with a productive capacity that would ultimately overwhelm all of America's enemies combined. Japanese celebrations of their Pearl Harbor victory proved premature as intelligence. Reports revealed they had failed to achieve their primary strategic objective. The American aircraft carrier force remained intact, submarine facilities were undamaged, and fuel storage had escaped destruction. Most importantly, American resolve had been unified rather than broken by the surprise attack. Japan had won a tactical victory while ensuring their ultimate strategic defeat. The attack's aftermath also revealed crucial intelligence failures that had enabled Japanese success. Multiple warning signs had been ignored or misinterpreted. Communication breakdowns had prevented proper alert procedures, and peacetime complacency had left American forces vulnerable to surprise attack. These lessons would transform American intelligence capabilities and military preparedness for the remainder of the global conflict. As 1941 drew to a close, Pearl Harbor had been transformed from a scene of devastating defeat into the foundation of inevitable victory. The ships rising from the harbor bottom carried with them the determination of a nation united in righteous anger. Japan's brilliant tactical success had become the catalyst for their own destruction, while America emerged from the ashes stronger and more determined than ever before. The sleeping giant had indeed awakened, and his terrible resolve would soon reach across the Pacific to exact full payment for December 7th's treachery. By the first anniversary of Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1942, the transformed Pacific Fleet had already begun, exacting revenge for Japan's Day of Infamy. The USS Enterprise, which had escaped destruction by being at sea during the original attack, now led carrier task forces that struck Japanese positions from the Marshall Islands to the heart of the enemy homeland. America's industrial might, fully awakened by Pearl Harbor's devastation, was producing vessels and aircraft at rates that staggered both allies and enemies. Admiral Chester Nimitz stood on Ford Island exactly 1 year after the attack, surveying a harbor that bore little resemblance to the smoke-shrouded anchorage he had inherited. Where twisted wreckage once littered the waterfront, new construction facilities hummed with activity. The Navy Yard had expanded exponentially, becoming the Pacific's premier repair and construction facility. Ships that had been declared total losses now sailed again, their battle scars worn as badges of honor rather than shame. The Doolittle raid of April 18, 1942, had carried America's response directly to Japan's homeland, when 16 B-25 bombers launched from the carrier Hornet struck Tokyo, Yokohama, and other Japanese cities. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle's raiders proved that Japan's sacred islands were not invulnerable, while demonstrating America's growing capacity for offensive operations across the vast Pacific expanse. At the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, American forces had fought the Japanese to a tactical draw while achieving strategic victory by preventing the capture of Port Moresby. The engagement marked the first naval battle fought entirely by aircraft carriers, with surface vessels never coming within sight of each other. Pearl Harbor's survivors had learned to fight with new weapons and tactics that would revolutionize naval warfare forever. The Battle of Midway, fought from June 4 through 7, 1942, represented Pearl Harbor's ultimate vindication. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding Task Force 16, led Enterprise and Hornet against the same Japanese fleet that had attacked Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier. In a single day, American dive bombers destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, along with their experienced flight crews and maintenance personnel. Time magazine's coverage of the Midway victory emphasized how completely the balance of Pacific naval power had shifted in America's favor within just 6 months of Pearl Harbor's apparent catastrophe. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack force, found himself aboard the burning carrier Akagi as American bombs destroyed his flagship. The same pilot who had transmitted "Tora, Tora, Tora" now witnessed Japan's naval aviation strength consumed in flames remarkably similar to those that had engulfed Pearl Harbor. The Wheel of Fortune had completed its revolution with devastating thoroughness. The Phoenix fleet continued growing as Pearl Harbor's salvage operations restored vessel after vessel to active service. California returned to combat duty in January 1944, participating in operations throughout the Central Pacific. West Virginia emerged from Reconstruction as one of the war's most modern battleships, her upgraded radar and fire control systems making her more capable than ever before. Tennessee and Maryland similarly returned to service with enhanced capabilities that reflected hard-learned lessons from December 7th. Production miracles that followed Pearl Harbor transformed America into the world's dominant industrial power. By 1943, American shipyards were launching vessels faster than enemies could sink them, while aircraft production exceeded all other nations combined. The attack that was supposed to cripple American naval power had instead triggered an industrial mobilization that overwhelmed Axis forces through sheer material superiority. The human legacy of Pearl Harbor extended far beyond military statistics. Gold Star mothers whose sons had died in the attack found purpose in war production work, building the weapons that would avenge their losses. Survivors of Arizona and Oklahoma served aboard new vessels, carrying with them lessons learned in the harbor's burning waters. The attack had created a generation of Americans united by shared sacrifice and common purpose. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Pearl Harbor's architect, was shot down and killed by American fighter pilots on April 18, 1943. Exactly 1 year after the Doolittle raid. His death symbolized how completely the strategic situation had reversed since December 7, 1941. The man who had warned of awakening America's sleeping giant had become a victim of that giant's terrible resolve. As the war progressed toward its inevitable conclusion, Pearl Harbor's lessons influenced every aspect of American military planning. Never again would the United States be caught unprepared for surprise attack. Intelligence capabilities expanded dramatically, early warning systems proliferated, and military readiness became a permanent national priority. The peaceful Sunday morning that had ended in flames had taught America the price of complacency in a dangerous world. The crimson skies of December 7, 1941, had indeed changed the fate of a hemisphere. From Pearl Harbor's ashes had risen not just a reconstructed fleet, but a transformed nation committed to global leadership and eternal vigilance. Japan's moment of tactical brilliance had become the foundation of their complete strategic defeat, while America emerged from the Pacific War as the world's dominant superpower. The sleeping giant had awakened, and the world would never be the same.